The evening was quiet and soft, and the little house felt almost empty. A woman named Sarah sat on her couch with tired eyes, holding a cup of tea in her hands. Her day had been long and heavy, and her heart carried a weight she could not explain. She searched for something to ease her mind, something that could bring her comfort when words failed. Her hand reached for the remote, and the screen before her lit up. After a moment of scrolling, she stopped when she saw a face she knew very well. It was the face of Lacey Chabert. Sarah had seen Lacey many times before in Hallmark movies. There was something different about her, something that made her roles more than just simple stories. For people like Sarah, Lacey was not only an actress, but also a quiet companion. Through her movies, she brought love, hope, and healing into the lives of strangers. Sarah pressed play, and the sound of gentle music filled the room. The light of the television washed over her face as she sank deeper into her seat. The movie began with snowy streets and a warm little town. Lacey's character walked in, carrying emotions in her eyes that no words could fully describe. Sarah felt her chest grow tight as she followed the story of love lost and love rediscovered. She had lived a similar pain in her own life, the pain of waiting for someone who never came back. Watching Lacey on screen was like watching her own silent heart speak out loud. Sarah's lips trembled, but she smiled through her tears. This was the strange magic of these movies. They were simple, yet they carried feelings so deep they could reach into someone's hidden wounds. Lacey's soft smile, her quiet tears, and her strength in difficult scenes all felt real. It was as if she was whispering to Sarah, "You are not alone. Your story is not forgotten." As the movie went on, Sarah remembered other times she had watched Lacey's films. Each one carried a different kind of lesson. One was about forgiveness, another about courage, and one about finding light after a long storm. The movies never felt like they were only for fun. They were like little mirrors that showed pieces of life that everyone carried in secret. Sarah leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of laughter from the screen surround her. She thought about how people often ranked movies, best to worst, favorite to least favorite. But for her, ranking did not matter. Each film was like a page from a book of life. Some were bright and full of joy, some were heavy with pain, and some gave her the ending she had always wished for herself. There was one movie that had always stayed in her memory. In it, Lacey played a woman who had lost almost everything but found healing in a small town filled with strangers who slowly became family. Sarah remembered crying through that movie because it reminded her of her own loss years ago. Her husband had died young, and she had thought she would never heal. Watching that story unfold had been like watching her pain turn into hope, little by little. The tea in her cup had grown cold, but Sarah didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on the screen as snowflakes fell gently around the characters. Outside her own window, the world was dark and quiet, but inside, the stories gave her warmth. She realized that these films were more than just stories. They were like friends who sat beside her, reminding her that even broken hearts could shine. The movie reached its turning point, and Sarah felt her heart race. She realized something she had never thought about before. What if these movies were not just for passing time? What if each one carried a hidden reflection of real emotions that so many people tried to hide? Maybe that was why millions loved them so deeply. Maybe that was why they never grew old, no matter how many times they were played. Her curiosity grew stronger. She wanted to know what made these films so powerful, what made Lacey Chabert so special in the world of Hallmark. It was not only about acting. It was something deeper, something invisible yet felt by everyone who watched her. Sarah paused the screen and stared at Lacey's frozen smile. It almost felt alive, as if the actress herself was asking her a silent question, "Are you ready to see the truth behind these stories?" A sudden shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She knew this was not just about watching movies anymore. It was the start of something bigger. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pressed play again. But now she was watching differently. She was not only searching for comfort. She was on a journey to discover why these movies had the power to touch hearts, including her own. She did not yet know that as she moved from one movie to the next, her own life would slowly begin to change. That night, the story on the screen was only the beginning of her own story. The night passed slowly, but Sarah could not sleep. Her mind kept returning to the movies she had just watched. The faces, the voices, and the quiet lessons stayed with her like echoes that refused to fade. She woke up early the next morning with tired eyes but a restless heart. Instead of starting her day with the usual routine, she went straight back to the living room, turned on the television, and searched for another Hallmark film with Lacey Chabert. This time the movie began differently. It was not winter but autumn, with golden leaves covering the streets of another small town. The air looked crisp, and the sound of laughter filled the screen. Lacey's character appeared again, but she was not the same as before. She was a new woman, full of energy but hiding a pain only she knew. Sarah leaned forward, drawn deeper into the story. It amazed her how Lacey could play so many different roles yet always carry the same gentle strength that comforted hearts. As the movie unfolded, Sarah noticed small things, the way Lacey looked when she was hurt, the way her voice softened when she forgave someone, and the way her smile seemed to heal not just the other characters but the audience watching too. Sarah's own heart felt lighter with every scene. She thought of how her life had also been filled with moments of pain and forgiveness, of letting go and learning to move forward. But what struck her most was the way each story carried suspense. Even though these were Hallmark movies, where happy endings were almost certain, the journey was never easy. There were twists that made Sarah's heart tighten, secrets that made her curious, and choices that made her wonder what she herself would do if she were in the same place. She realized this was why she never grew tired of them. They were not only predictable romances. They were mirrors of life, showing how even the simplest journeys had storms and struggles before peace finally came. She thought about the way people ranked movies. Critics often judged them, calling some too simple, others too emotional. But Sarah knew the truth. For people like her, these movies were not about perfect storytelling or high ratings. They were about feelings, about the courage to keep hoping even when everything seemed lost. She smiled to herself, whispering, if they only knew how much these stories matter. Hours passed, and Sarah watched one movie after another. Each film felt like a chapter of a book, and she was determined to read them all. She noticed that while some movies became her favorites instantly, others took time to grow on her. Some reminded her of her childhood dreams, and others reminded her of her painful past. But all of them carried a spark, a quiet message that touched her heart. One particular film that day stayed with her. In it, Lacey played a woman who had returned to her hometown after many years. She was afraid of facing the people she had left behind and the mistakes she once made. At first, she kept herself distant, but slowly the town began to welcome her again. Watching that, Sarah felt her chest ache. She too had once walked away from people she loved. She too had once been afraid to return. The story felt almost like a secret message meant only for her. Tears filled her eyes, and she let them fall freely. For the first time in years, she did not fight her emotions. She realized that maybe this was why she kept coming back to Lacey's movies. They gave her permission to feel again, to open the wound she had tried to bury, and to heal slowly with every scene. As the credits rolled, Sarah sat quietly. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the wind outside. She hugged a pillow close to her chest and closed her eyes. In that silence, she understood something new. These movies were not only stories of others, they were bridges between her past and her present. They reminded her that she was still alive, that she still had chapters of her own story left to write. But along with comfort, there was also a strange sense of suspense. Sarah felt as if she was standing at the beginning of a road she had not traveled yet. Watching these films was not enough anymore. She wanted to explore deeper. She wanted to know how many others felt the same way. Were there people out there whose lives had also changed because of these movies? Were there hidden truths behind why Lacey's work touched so many? The thought stayed in her heart like a spark waiting to grow. She knew that this was no longer just about watching quietly in her living room. Something was calling her, something that would push her toward a journey she had never imagined. That evening, as she turned off the screen and looked around her quiet home, she whispered softly to herself, "This is only the beginning." She did not yet know what the next step would be, but she felt a pull, like a thread connecting her heart to the story she loved. A thread that would soon lead her toward discoveries, memories, and truths she was not ready for. And so, Sarah's journey with Lacey's movies continued, but this time it was no longer only about comfort. It was about finding herself in the stories, about uncovering something deeper, something she could not yet name. That night, sleep finally came, but her dreams were filled with faces, towns, and voices from the movies. They felt so real, almost as if her own life had started to merge with the stories she loved so much. The days that followed were unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Each evening she found herself drawn back to the glowing screen, eager to watch another Hallmark movie with Lacey Chabert. It became a quiet ritual, almost sacred. She no longer watched just to pass the time, she watched to feel alive. With every story, she discovered something about herself, something hidden that had been sleeping inside her heart for years. One evening, Sarah chose a movie where Lacey played a woman who had built walls around her heart after a painful betrayal. In the story, she avoided love, avoided trust, and pretended she was fine. Sarah's breath caught as she watched. It felt too close, almost like someone had written her own story into the script. She too had built walls after losing her husband. She too had smiled at the world while silently breaking inside. The more she watched, the heavier her heart grew. But at the same time, she felt a strange relief. Seeing Lacey's character slowly open up again, learning to trust step by step, gave her a kind of courage she had not felt in years. It whispered to her that maybe she could also take small steps, even if the world outside felt frightening. But there was another layer to her feelings now. It was not just about finding comfort or healing. It was about the suspense of what these stories were truly doing to her. She had started to notice patterns. The themes of forgiveness, second chances, and hidden strength were not only in the movies, they were becoming a part of her daily thoughts. She began to wonder if these films were changing her more than she realized. She noticed it one morning when she walked into her kitchen. The sunlight through the window looked softer than usual, almost like the golden glow of a Hallmark scene. For the first time in years, she placed flowers in a vase and smiled at their gentle beauty. Later that day, she greeted her neighbor with warmth, something she had not done in a long time. It was as if the movies were teaching her to live again, to see her own world with fresh eyes. That evening, Sarah decided to look up more about Lacey Chabert. She read articles and interviews, each one filled with admiration for the actress. People described her as the Queen of Hallmark, someone who carried kindness both on and off the screen. Sarah felt her heart swell. It was no wonder these stories carried such warmth. Perhaps they reflected the very soul of the woman who brought them to life. But the more Sarah read, the more curious she became. She thought about the way people ranked and reviewed these films. Some were loved, some less so. But what did those rankings really mean? To Sarah, each movie had been a lifeline, a whisper of hope. She wondered how many others felt the same. Were there people out there who healed through these stories as she had? The thought gave her a quiet thrill, as if she was no longer alone in her journey. That night, she watched another film. This one was about a woman who returned to her roots, facing a past she had tried to escape. There was suspense in the way secrets were revealed slowly, each truth heavier than the last. Sarah sat at the edge of her couch, her pulse quickening. She realized she was no longer watching as an outsider. She was living inside the story. Each twist felt personal, each decision felt like her own. The ending brought tears again, but also something else, a spark of courage. Sarah whispered to herself, if she can face her past, maybe I can too. It was a thought she had avoided for years, but now it stood before her, refusing to leave. When the movie ended, Sarah turned off the screen and sat in the quiet darkness of her living room. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to remember the places she had avoided, the people she had lost touch with, and the unfinished parts of her own life. It was frightening, but it also felt necessary. Her heart beat faster, and she felt as though the movies were guiding her somewhere. It was not clear yet, but the path was opening slowly. She could sense it in the way her days felt lighter, in the way her nights carried a new kind of rest. She was changing, one story at a time. Yet, along with the comfort came a question she could not shake. Were these movies just coincidences, or was there something more? Why did every story seem to echo her life so closely? Why did every character feel like a reflection of her hidden thoughts? The question haunted her, filling her with suspense she had not expected. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah stared at the ceiling and whispered, "What are these stories trying to tell me?" The silence of her room gave no answer, but deep inside, she felt that something was waiting to be revealed. And so, her journey continued, not only with the movies, but with her own life, which was slowly becoming a story of its own. The morning sun spilled gently through Sarah's curtains, and for the first time in years she did not wake up with the same heavy silence in her heart. Something was different. Her nights of watching Lacey Chabert's Hallmark movies had planted quiet seeds inside her. She felt a strange mixture of restlessness and hope, as if life was softly pushing her toward something new. Sarah prepared her breakfast slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the film she had watched the night before. The story of returning home, of facing old wounds, was still fresh in her mind. She could not shake off the feeling that the story had been meant for her. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, whispering, "Maybe it's time for me too." That day, instead of staying inside as usual, she decided to take a walk through her town. The streets looked brighter, filled with little details she had ignored before. Children ran past her with laughter, shopkeepers greeted familiar faces, and leaves danced in the early wind. It felt like she was walking through one of those small-town settings she had seen so often in Hallmark movies. For the first time, Sarah saw beauty in her own surroundings. But with beauty came memory. As she passed by a cafe on the corner, she stopped suddenly. Years ago, she and her late husband had shared coffee at that very place. The sight made her chest tighten, and for a moment she wanted to turn away. Yet, something held her still. She remembered how in one of Lacey's movies, the character had faced the exact same moment, standing before a painful memory and choosing not to run. Sarah took a deep breath and, instead of walking away, she entered the cafe. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh bread surrounded her. The sound of chatter filled the air, and she found herself smiling faintly. She sat at a small table by the window, the same place she once sat with him. Tears threatened her eyes, but instead of breaking down, she felt a calm acceptance. It was painful, yes, but it was also healing. She realized that memories did not have to be chains. They could also be gentle reminders of love once lived. That evening, she returned home and once again turned on a Hallmark film. This time, the story was about a woman helping others while secretly needing help herself. The suspense of watching someone hide their struggles behind kindness reminded Sarah of her own life. She had always been strong for others, never letting anyone see how fragile she was inside. Watching the character's truth unfold on the screen gave her courage. It made her ask herself, "Am I ready to be honest too?" As the movie went on, Sarah felt her heart racing. Each twist in the story seemed to echo her hidden fears, each scene asking her to look deeper into herself. She leaned forward, unable to pull her eyes away. She knew this was not just entertainment anymore. It was guidance. Every film was giving her pieces of a puzzle she had been too afraid to solve. By the time the movie ended, Sarah was filled with questions she could no longer ignore. Why did these stories arrive in her life now, at this exact time? Why did they match her emotions so closely? Was it only coincidence, or was there something larger at work, something unseen yet deeply connected to her journey? The suspense of it all left her restless. She paced her living room, whispering to herself, what if these movies are not only stories? What if they are messages for people like me, telling us how to move forward? The thought shook her, yet it also gave her a spark of hope she had not felt in years. Later that night, she opened her laptop and began searching through lists of Hallmark movies ranked and reviewed. She read the opinions of strangers, some praising the films, some dismissing them as too simple. But Sarah smiled softly, because she knew the truth. For those who needed healing, there was nothing simple about these stories. They carried the power to rebuild broken hearts. Still, one review caught her attention. It mentioned that Lacey's roles often carried hidden depth, that behind the light-hearted romance there were always lessons of courage and renewal. Sarah's heart quickened as she read. She felt as though someone else had seen what she saw, felt what she felt. She was not alone. That realization gave her a new kind of courage. She closed the laptop and stared at the dark window, her reflection looking back at her. For the first time in years, she felt ready. Ready to open her heart, ready to take steps into the world she had hidden from. The movies had not only entertained her, they had awakened her. Yet deep inside, one question remained, stronger than ever: why now? Why was her life suddenly aligning with these stories? What was waiting for her beyond the comfort of her screen? As Sarah lay down to sleep, her mind was filled with possibilities. The suspense of her own future was more gripping than any film she had watched. She did not know the answers yet, but she knew the journey was far from over. Her story was unfolding, one chapter at a time, just like the movies she loved. And though she did not yet see the ending, she felt a quiet certainty in her heart: the best was still to come. The next morning came with a softness that Sarah had not felt in years. She stood near the window, watching the sunlight fall across her small garden. The flowers she had placed in the vase days ago were still blooming gently, as if reminding her that life could carry beauty even after long seasons of silence. For the first time in so long, Sarah felt alive, as though her story was not ending but just beginning. Her evenings of watching Lacey Chabert's Hallmark movies had given her more than comfort. They had given her courage. They had given her a reason to look at her life with new eyes. She had faced painful memories, opened her heart to the past, and now she felt ready to step into the future. But a quiet question still lived inside her: what do I do with this new strength? That day, Sarah did something she had avoided for years. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her old contacts. Her fingers trembled when she stopped at a familiar name: her sister's. They had not spoken in years after a misunderstanding that had never healed. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart racing. She remembered one of Lacey's movies, where the character had chosen to forgive even when it felt impossible. With a deep breath, Sarah pressed the call button. The phone rang, and every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, a voice answered. "Hello." It was her sister, sounding surprised. For a moment, Sarah could not speak. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "It's me. I've missed you." There was silence on the other end, then a shaky laugh. "I've missed you too." In that simple moment, years of distance melted away. Sarah realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting the pain. It was about choosing love over pride. The weight in her heart began to lift, replaced by a warmth she had almost forgotten. That evening, Sarah turned on another Hallmark movie, but this time she watched with different eyes. She was no longer looking for escape. She was watching as someone who had begun to live her own story again. Every smile, every twist, every hopeful ending reminded her that her life too could hold new chapters. As the movie played, Sarah thought about the journey she had taken. From the lonely nights of silence to the quiet courage of facing her memories, the movies had been her companions. They had been her teachers, her comfort, and her mirrors. She realized that ranking and reviewing them was never truly about numbers or stars. It was about the way they touched hearts. Some movies gave her healing, others gave her courage, and a few gave her hope strong enough to change her life. But the most surprising part of her journey was how suspenseful it had felt. She had started with no idea where it would lead, only to discover that the stories she watched had slowly blended into her own. The lessons on screen had become lessons in her real life. The emotions she saw in characters had awakened the ones she had buried inside herself. As the credits rolled, Sarah smiled through her tears. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Lacey." It felt silly to say it out loud, but she meant it. Because without those stories, she might never have found the courage to face her past, to forgive, and to believe in hope again. The night grew quiet, and Sarah stepped outside into the cool air. The sky above was filled with stars, glowing softly against the darkness. She looked up, her heart full. Life was still uncertain. There would still be struggles, losses, and storms ahead. But she was no longer afraid. She had learned, just as the movies had shown her, that every dark season could lead to light, every broken heart could heal, and every ending could become a new beginning. She stood there for a long time, feeling the night wind brush against her face. And for the first time in years, she smiled not because of what was on a screen, but because of what was inside her own soul. She was ready now, not only to watch stories, but to live her own. The journey that began with simple movies had turned into something much greater. It had turned into a story of healing, courage, and hope. Sarah realized that her life, like the movies she loved, would always carry both suspense and beauty. And though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing for certain: her story was far from over.